Hello everyone, Mr. Criminal Man is here once again on his quest to provide the narcs more and more evidence for why I'm committing a federal crime that will give me a life sentence. And that crime is downloading ROMs on the internet. So I was working while listening to some YouTube videos in the background, and I caught a video from this content creator that I like, which was logically answered. Now the video in question was, is piracy morally wrong or simply illegal? Now spoiler alert, the answer he gave in his video was yes. While he did approach the topic in a more nuanced manner and gave arguments for both sides, in the end, it was clear he was leaning more on the stance of it being immoral. And that's fine. Frankly speaking, I know some of you might think that I'm this sea-sailing pirate advocating for people to torrent movies. However, I'm not really like that. I pay for media, quite a lot. I like paying for the stuff I consume. I like contributing to industries that I spend a lot of my time on. Hell, not so long ago, I paid for a copy of a CD, one that not only will I not be able to even play on any of my devices because Sony are a bunch of assholes and won't let their PlayStation 4 or 5 play CDs, but also I didn't even really need to listen to it on any of my devices because, well, I can already listen to the exact same songs on YouTube Music, to which I also paid for. I bought this purely because I wanted to support it, so I don't advocate for piracy necessarily, nor do I even really recommend doing it depending on which country you're in, because at the end of the day, it's still illegal. Are you ever gonna go to jail for torrenting Batman Begins? Probably not, but you're always vulnerable to receiving legal action in the future. However, with that said, while I don't recommend pirating media, that doesn't mean I think it's actually morally wrong. And that's why I kind of want to respond to this video, not as an attack on Logically Answered. Think of this as more of me offering my own perspective on the matter, one that I'm sure many would share. Now, the part of the video I cared the most about is the first section, which was in regards to entertainment media. I'll get into softer piracy in a minute, but I do want to elaborate a bit further on the argument of affordability that he refuted, because this one actually comes close to home. You see, you might have seen a tweet or a video I made in the past and assumed that I'm Portuguese, although I've only been living in Portugal since 2016. My entire childhood was spent on this small African country called Mozambique. The city that I grew up in is actually among the most developed ones in the country, so I would even say 90% of the country as a whole is in a much shittier position than I'm about to describe to you right now. This is a third world country, and I have a lot of perspective on piracy present in the entertainment market. You see, growing up, to watch movies in households, there were two options: TV broadcasts or DVDs. Now, when it came to DVDs, this was something that was emblematic of the entirety of the country, regardless of which financial position you were in. Even the richest people living there all pirated movies, specifically through bootleg DVDs. It was practically a part of our culture to go to the street, spot a bunch of dudes selling DVDs, often had to rotate between locations in order to get away from the cops, even though they also bought bootleg DVDs. It's something that everyone did. Even big local channels broadcasted pirated episodes of Tom and Jerry Tales. I'm not even joking with you. And no one would even really think about it. And the reason why this became a staple to our buying habits was due to the fact that back then there weren't that many stores selling original DVDs. In my experience, the only official DVD stores available back in the days were primarily rental DVDs. Original music albums were still commonplace, but actual movies? No one sold them, and the amount you would have to pay to watch them for however long you were contractually obligated to watch before returning it was sometimes higher than the bootleg DVDs you buy on the streets. It was honestly such a lost market that when it came to selling PS2 games, many game stores decided to give fuck all and just sold pirated PS2 games. And we're talking about stores that were located in one of the biggest shopping centers in my city. They knew what they were doing. They were smart and realized that no one was going to buy PS2 games if it meant that they needed to pay 20 times what they normally would for pirated DVDs. And you might be asking, why was selling physical copies so hard? Still is to this day, I would say. Well, let me put it into perspective. So in Mozambique, the main currency is called Mythical. Now, an original PS2 game back then would cost around 1,000 or 2,000 Mythicals. Honestly, I'm being extremely generous here. It was probably a lot more than that. But again, we're just being completely charitable right now. Now, and I'm not bullshitting you when I'm saying this, I've met people back then that would earn literally that exact amount monthly. This was someone's wage back then. In fact, you can look it up right now. Minimum wages in Mozambique until this day, even in official label sections, can vary in the thousands. There are some people that would literally have to pay their entire salary to buy one game. It's honestly why I believe a lot of publishers didn't even bother trying to port their physical media there, especially when the people that could truly afford to buy these things would probably just end up buying them in the neighbor country, South Africa. Hell, I remember buying How I Met Your Mother DVDs every time I visited Nelspruit once a year. But the average person living in Mozambique, even if they're not at the bottom of the living earnings, can you seriously convince the average person living in the country to spend thousands on movies and video games? Especially with video games, since back then, no one above the age of 12 played video games. It was mostly seen as a hobby for kids and teenagers. So you literally had to convince your parents to spend what was in their perspective a bunch of toys, the equivalent of someone's minimum salary. This is why, at least in my opinion, this is a case where I don't see anything inherently immoral about pirating media, because we're talking about a group of people that wouldn't even dream of paying for these things, especially nowadays because, well, I mean, in case you haven't been following the news, Mozambique has not been in the most financially stable position ever since the second half of the 2010s. There are a lot of reasons why. I'm not going to share any of them, because if you think American politics is AIDS, oh boy, you're in for a treat when it comes to my home country. But that's neither here or there. Now, I get the whole argument that just because you can't afford a Lamborghini doesn't make it any less immoral to steal it. However, I find this argument to be a bit dishonest simply because piracy isn't stealing. In fact, the word piracy is not even all that accurate of a term to describe what we define as media piracy, because there's no endangerment or threat of anyone's lives during the process. We're not seeing pirate sites threatening official distributors with ransomware, for example, and blackmailing them into giving their unlocked content in order to distribute them somewhere else. Not only is that not the case, but most importantly, you're not actually stealing anything. When you pirate a DVD, all you're doing is making an unauthorized copy of the original material. If anything, I think a more accurate comparison would be if someone had this GigaChat 3D printer that can accurately replicate any functional object, including cars, and someone decided to 3D print a Lamborghini and sell it to lower prices. That is a much more fair and accurate comparison to make. And if you ask me, if something like this happened and it helped impoverish people in purchasing cars for more affordable prices that allowed them to live healthily while driving through the streets, then in all honesty, I don't even think my opinion would change too much. Stealing is bad. I actively stand against thievery, even if it's conducted by poor people. I get where they're coming from, I can sympathize with their grind, but it's still not something I stand by. You're taking away someone else's goods. Copying it, on the other hand, while it can devalue the original good, it's still in the possession of the original owners. So I don't think it's as immoral. It would maybe be more immoral if someone copied a piece of media and acted as if it were theirs, like they were the owners of the intellectual property or original creators. But that's not really what piracy is. That never happens ever. Not to say that there aren't aspects of piracy that are immoral, but I don't think they're on the same level as some of the more legitimate forms of thievery. Additionally, I would also argue that there are educational reasons for why piracy can be beneficial. Now, in this video, he did bring up software piracy and how this can actually help people who can't afford to pay for certain pieces of software. Now, this one I could go on for ages. Personally, I'm of the belief that information and educational knowledge should be free. I think locking them away with paywalls is pretty fucked, at least in my opinion. Although at the same time, I actually don't mind pieces of software costing money, even though I am an advocate of open source software, which doesn't even necessarily need to be free of cost in order to be one. Although it would mean that the source code needed to be available to the public and that other people would have the legal right to fork them and even distribute the forks for free if they wished. Honestly, if this happened with all programs, I don't even think that software piracy would be a thing, which is probably why a lot of companies don't like opening their source code, because they want to have a monopoly on the technology that they license, even if it comes at the cost of killing innovation, competitiveness, and even education. But regardless, this is a pretty vast subject and I'm not really all that interested in bringing it up in this video. I mainly want to focus on entertainment media, which I still believe can have a positive impact on people. For example, I consider myself someone who holds a lot of Western values, and much of that influence came from me exposing myself to Western media growing up. And let me tell you, I did not hold back on piracy back then. I would torrent as much as I could before my limited mobile data ran its course, and I honestly have no regrets, because the reason why I pay for media today is because I developed a passion for it growing up. Like, bro, I even used to pirate YouTube videos, for God's sake. I think a lot of film enthusiasts can be born from these undeveloped countries. A good example of this is Wakalihood, a great film project clearly made by passionate people. Let's be realistic. Do you seriously think not a single person that was a part of that crew ever pirated media in their entire lives? I'm sorry, but I've spent enough time in the deep rabbit holes of third world countries to know that that's a load of horse shit. Even in Western countries, how much do you want to bet that the anime community has evolved to the state that it is right now, largely due to pirate sites that have existed over the decades? It wasn't the only factor, there are a lot of other ones, such as classic OVAs sold during the 80s and 90s, the Toonami block, 4Kids, and other factors that I'm sure played their role in exposing Japanese animation to Western audiences. But if these same fans weren't willing to browse into the deep ends of the internet to watch subtitled anime that came out hours after they were originally broadcasted instead of waiting years for them to be dubbed, got exposed to a variety of obscure stuff that didn't match what was being pushed on local channels, if it wasn't for that, I'm honestly not sure if the anime brand would have grown as much as it has. Because it was either dealing with shitty limited dubs or paying gross amounts of money for DVDs. No normal human being is going to spend hundreds of dollars on classic junk just so they could watch some anime, especially not kids and teenagers. Because people need to keep in mind that what contributes to success isn't just how many copies you've sold or how much ad revenue you've earned. Those things are extremely important, but how popular your brand is can also be beneficial because the more eyes are on you, the more entities are willing to establish deals with you in order to promote their products, making collaborative projects. Hell, Crunchyroll literally used to be a site where people illegally hosted full episodes of anime for free. Look where it is right now. You know how it managed to grow into a legitimate business? Brand recognition. Its notoriety was enough to even attract the same people that would usually label them as enemies. And my argument isn't that I think corporations should enable piracy. Make no mistake, piracy can definitely be harmful, and I understand why many strive to combat it. They should do it actually, but I do think that corporations need to be aware of the variety of audiences and how they get exposed to their media. Find more logical and innovative ways to sell their stuff that addresses the financial discrepancies present in the market. And I would actually argue that there have been some attempts at addressing this issue. Game companies, for example, have offered subscription and Game Pass services that allow people to pay a certain amount of money to have access to a library of games, an amount that can often be the equivalent of buying 1 or 2 full-price games per year, but being able to play hundreds of them. I would even argue that anime streaming platforms have been doing more or less the same. Both Crunchyroll and HiDive cost €5 per month. That's almost the equivalent of a lot of children's lunch money. It wouldn't exactly be very difficult to ask your parents to pay €5 per month when they already give a rough amount whenever they go to school to eat lunch, at least every 3 days, sometimes less. Crunchyroll also lets people watch anime for free without paying, except they have to see more ads. The features are also a little bit more limited and the library isn't as big. Following this, later down the line, when they can afford to spend more money, they can start buying the real shit. Because in the end, how these companies play their cards can end up affecting how popular their brand becomes. And call me an immoral man all day, but if some kid in Africa watches Inception and dreams to become a filmmaker, to me that's inherently more valuable than whatever imaginary money Warner Brothers loses because the kid decided to watch it for free. Now, where things get a bit morally fucked up is when you can't afford to pay for something, you just simply don't want to. Now, on the subject of movies, television shows, video games, and other media, when it comes to supply and demand, there are two main factors that I want to highlight: cost and quality. There's this series that I like called Super Cub, but if I was ever forced to pay, for example, this is just a random number, $1,000 to watch this on Blu-ray, I would never want to buy it, ever. $50 on the other hand, while still a little pricey, I'd be willing to fork my money on it. So even though I do want to buy it, if I don't value it enough to pay the prices that they're offering, then I won't buy it. Something that makes things even muddier is that media also needs to be distributed on a platform. For example, the Xenoblade Chronicles series is one that I've been meaning to get into for a while, but there's one problem: it's a Nintendo exclusive. I don't own a Switch, I'm not interested in buying a Switch, so automatically this game is null and void. The same would also apply to streaming services. I love anime, but I hate all other streaming services out there, and unless I move to Japan and start watching anime when they air on TV, I have to rely on these services. So it basically boils down to two things. Either you're willing to sell your soul and pay for platforms that you don't even like just so you can have access to 2 or 3 shows that you'll realistically consume, or you could take the cheap route and just pirate them. And in all honesty, I don't think either of those options are inherently moral. The same way how I think it's harmful to not pay for the media that you like because you're avoiding supporting them and keeping them alive, I think it's equally, if not more harmful, to support anti-consumer practices that you don't agree with out of the basis of support the industry, because all you're doing is enabling bad business habits that shouldn't be encouraged. And sure, you could just tell them, just don't consume it. But when the option is there to watch it free of cost and without needing to deal with the bullshit business decisions made by the corporate figures, and I'm not talking about the products themselves, I'm talking about the platforms that they're hosted on, it's kinda hard to convince someone not to just pirate it even though they can easily do it. Personally speaking, I get a better experience watching anime using Anycly than I do with any other streaming platform, not just because of the library, but also because overall it's a faster, more efficient, and more consumer-friendly platform to use. Now, with that said, I'm probably someone that bites the bullet more often than take the cheap route, at least with video games. I never pirate games, unless they're out of print, because at that point it literally doesn't even matter if you pirate it or not. I mean, unless they get re-released, it basically just boils down to whether or not you want to support the scalpers and secondhand vendors. But as far as new or old games that are still on sale, I have no problem paying for them, even though I have my share of disagreements with a lot of the DRM protection present in a lot of these games. With anime, it's a bit more complicated simply because it's a lot less accessible to me. All I can say is that I'm not paying for more than one streaming service. I think streaming services are crap, and it would go completely against my core morals to support the industry in the state that it is right now. But at the same time, I don't feel very comfortable not spending any money on anime, which is why I keep at least one streaming service. And Netflix. My family uses a lot more than I do. I actually don't even like Netflix. Nevertheless, if there's something that isn't available on Crunchyroll or Netflix, I will open up my terminal and look for the anime myself. That's just how it is for me. I also buy Blu-rays and manga copies every now and then. I don't even really consume any of them. It's really just a way of me giving back to them because, like I said at the beginning of the video, I genuinely enjoy supporting the entertainment industry, which is why I rarely even advocate for piracy. I don't even think I've done that on my channel. Maybe on Twitter, but not on my YouTube channel. The most I usually do is jokingly admit that I've surfed the web a few times, but I'm not really all that interested in endorsing piracy because I want more people to support the creators that they like. It's just that it's unfortunate that in order to do that, you also have to pay money to some other people that you don't care about, which sucks, and I can go on a whole rant about this all day. But even then, it's still more ideal seeing projects that I like earning money, even if there are some corporate entities behind. I don't want my favorite industry to die. I don't want my favorite studios to collapse financially. It's why I buy games on the PlayStation Store, even though I frankly don't like Sony. I think they're one of the biggest abusers of copyright agreements in the entertainment sphere as a whole. But I like PlayStation enough that I'm willing to spend money on it. It doesn't please me, a part of me dies inside, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make for myself because I'd rather financially support game studios that are doing cool things by purchasing their games. I got a comment not so long ago where I was accused of trying to justify piracy because I didn't want to support the corporations, but no, trust me, I only use 2% of my sea-sealing powers. I've been in the game ever since I was a kid, leeching off of Wi-Fi networks from neighbors, restaurants, and even using my school's IT room, playing around with SD cards because I didn't have a computer, downloading torrents on my poor man's Android phone, buying SD to USB adapters and converting MKV files to MP4 in order to play them on my PS3. If anything, I've pretty much been a retired monk ever since I moved to Portugal. But with that said, I don't just turn a blind eye to the reality that we live in, and I don't think we should just convince ourselves that we're living in this fantasy world where we blindly believe that piracy is this evil thing just because you watch a bunch of obnoxious DVD adverts growing up. Morality isn't just blindly following the law, and even from an economic viewpoint, when discussing media consumption, we also need to analyze the market for what it actually is. My economics teacher even used to say that black market, whether it's legal or not, was integral to understanding the behavior and direction of the overall market, and trying to omit them is incredibly naive. Ultimately, I always like referring back to what Gabe Newell said many years ago.
Piracy to us, so we don't really worry about piracy. When we think, when you look at the top 10 issues on our list at any given point in time, piracy is almost never something that's on that list. And the reason that we think that we don't have issues with piracy is that there's misconceptions in the industry about what piracy is, right? There's assumption that what is piracy? Piracy is about people who want to steal stuff from you, right? That they don't want to pay any money and they want to get your content. But when you look at the fact that these people have, $2,000 PCs and, they're spending $50 a month US more on their internet connections, clearly they're willing to spend money. So from our point of view, what we saw more and more is that piracy is the result of bad service on the part of game companies. So an example where that was really clear is Russia, right? Everybody in the United States knows that Russians are pirates, right? So there's no point in localizing your game. There's no point in making your product available in Russia, because all they'll do is pirate it. When the reality is that the pirates in Russia were actually doing a much better job than the games companies themselves in localizing the product and making it available. So if I wanted the product and I didn't want to wait 6 months to get the product, and if I wanted it in Russian, I was going to have to go to a pirate simply because I couldn't get it any other way. And as soon as the product became available at the same time that it was available in Australia or the UK or the United States, and it was localized in Russia, all of a sudden our piracy problems in Russia disappeared. So it really is a question of viewing yourself as how can you provide the best possible service to your customers, and pricing really is one of the less important aspects of that whole equation. People are happy to pay money if they're getting what they perceive as a great product delivered on their terms.